For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Did you know that every 8th company in India is a startup? Did you know that the startups in this country account for 10% of the white-collar jobs? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. Little under a fortnight ago, Blume Ventures released its much-awaited Indus Valley report. Many consider it to be the holy grail of the Indian startup ecosystem. This year's big takeaway was the coming of age of the Indian startup ecosystem, mirroring a similar transformation underway in the Indian economy. In fact, they are feeding off each other. To understand this and more, we spoke to Sajith Pai of Blume Ventures. He is also the co-author of this report. The Indus Valley report is inspired by the legendary Mary Meeker report on internet trends. However, this is different.
The Mary Meeker report is blessed with the fact that it's born out of the US ecosystem, where there's a lot of data, right? The challenge with India is a lot of primary data is hard to come by and also dated. So we've had to use a lot of alternative data sets, sometimes proxy numbers, sometimes, comparisons, benchmarks, sometimes, tweets and memes to kind of make the point. So very early on, we decided that just doing a data-driven exposition of the Indian startup ecosystem was going to be very hard to come by. So what we did was instead re-looked at it as a narrative. And India is sort of a canvas where multiple stories and threads and themes are playing out. And we thought this would be the best way to present all of them in their richness, complexity, and the interplays of that. So that was really the thought.
Sajith is spot on. India is like an onion. Uncovering it layer by layer is the key to understanding it. And Indus Valley report does this by dividing India into India 1, India 2 and India 3.
And Anil, I think the implications that you said is that we have to be very cognizant of the fact that India 1 is a consuming nation. 120 million people, 25 to 30 million households, per capita income of around $12,000, which is sort of like a Mexico. Think of it as a Mexico sitting in India. India 2, a newly minted lower digital middle class. Think of them as a Philippines sitting in India. About 100 million people, all created in the last 6 years thanks to Geo, the dramatic fall in bandwidth costs, a smartphone in almost every pocket who can afford it, leading to about 100 million people with about $3,000 per capita income. Think of them as a Philippines to the Mexico of India 1. And finally, India 3, which is really consumers of this. They probably watch YouTube, they probably use a little bit of UPI, but they're not really consumers in the truest sense. And that's about, I would say, over 1 billion people, and they earn about $1,500 per capita income. So really, these are the stacks. And I would really say that all of Startup India, and really most of the large consumer brands in India are really catering to India 1, barring, of course, FMCG brands. They do cater to all of India. And I think that the challenge is that the funding that flows in, Anil, is sort of looks at all of India 1, India 2 and India 3. And that is sort of the disconnect, and that is what you have to keep in mind.
The big question then is whether there's been any movement between the three stacks.
If anything, India 1 has grown over India 2. So India 1's growth rate has been a little more faster than India 2. And one of the interesting findings is that India 2 got squeezed during COVID, and India 2's numbers have dropped a little bit because a lot of them fell into India 3. So, and India 1 has grown because the upper runs of India 2 fed into upper runs of India 2 fed into India 1. So India 2's got squeezed, and sort of that is actually the danger that we have to worry about. We are beginning to see some of this in the output numbers. You're seeing great car sales, luxury housing sales, but you're not necessarily seeing consumption take off. For example, there was some talk about footwear sales not keeping up the track, etc. So this is sort of the implication that India 3 is growing, but that's not good news. India 2 is not growing, which is not good news. India 1 is growing, which is good news, but you don't want that to be the only good news. So this is how we kind of seeing this. In the long term, I do see prospects for India 2 to grow. Okay, and I don't expect this to continue forever. In the long term, I do see India as a stronger growth story than most people right now believe it to be.
From what Sajith said, India's consumer economy is firing on a single engine at the moment. However, over the last 10 years, material empowerment is happening on a war footing, whether it be about cooking gas, electricity, drinking water, housing, roads, name it. So clearly, India's social capital is being improved and being expanded. So India's best is yet to come.
I think that's a fair assertion. I would agree with that. I am an eternal India optimist. And I think what you see, all of that you talked about, has dramatically reduced poverty. Okay. It has turned India 3 really, and maybe there was an India 4, which has now disappeared, and it's all India 3. And India 3's per capita income has now grown to over $1,500. It used to be about $1,200 or so dollars when I started looking at it last in 2018. So those numbers have grown too. There's been dramatic reduction in poverty. At the same time, the truth is that they are not yet consumers to the extent that in India 1 and maybe the upper ends of India 2 are. But however, I'm a big believer in the principle of compounding. And what all of this is doing, all of those initiatives that you said, the improvement in electricity, which is very critical, the improvement in roads, water access, okay? Improvements in access is steadily removing Indians from deep poverty into, I would say, the lowest rungs of the middle class or the lower class, upper rungs of the lower class, and then giving them an ability to enter the lower middle class. So in that respect, I'm a big believer that all of these initiatives are laying the foundation and are fundamentally playing a compounding role. So I am a big believer in what you said.
The Indus Valley report shares two stunning facts with us. One, that the e-commerce spread is grossly exaggerated. Second, that 50 to 70% of the e-commerce transactions entail cash on delivery. This despite the stupendous rise of UPI.
Where you talk about why do we have such a large cash on delivery economy. And in fact, this year we even spoke to someone in a very large e-com delivery company. And he confirmed, he's the CEO of that, and confirmed that there hasn't been much change in the movement. So when we talk about UPI, and it's a great question, why isn't cash on delivery coming down? And we believe it has to do with a couple of factors. There's no one single factor, but two factors. One is that India is still a low trust country, and a lot of people want to touch and feel what they buy before they pass over. So it could. So we also asked, is it that people are seeing it and then doing UPI? So there's a little bit of that, but cash on delivery is actually cash on delivery today. So perhaps people have a lot more cash they want to kind of give. So some of it is low trust. Two is the fact that 30% of Indian e-commerce is fashion. And for fashion, sizing is an important factor. And we don't have as standardized sizing as, for example, I'm not saying West sorted it out. It's slightly better there. In India, it's not so standardized.
The big takeaway from the Indus Valley report and our conversation with Sajith so far is that India's startup ecosystem is no longer on the periphery. It is now mainstream. Why?
I'll point to two reasons why I say that confidently. One of them is the finding that the startup economy is responsible for a fairly large corpus of capital coming in. Amal and I looked at the inflows versus mutual funds, the net inflows versus mutual funds, and the capital that has come in. So last year, just $24 billion was invested into the startup ecosystem by VCs and growth investors. And we found out that that far exceeds the net mutual fund inflows. Whereas in countries like the US, etc., it's the other way around. The net mutual inflows are far, far bigger. The result of that, Anil, is that the Indian startup ecosystem, okay, if you take just the unicorns, we found out that the value of the unicorns, now you might say that, hey, that's the point in history, some of that has to come down. Fair, I mean, I won't deny that. Versus, say, the market capitalization of the BSE and the NSE, which is roughly the entire total market capitalization is around 3.5 trillion. Maybe it's come down to 3 trillion again. It's around 10%. So all of the unicorns put together accounts as just 10% of the total market capitalization. It's double that of US or China. So we punch a fairly above our weight when it comes to the Indian economy. Then there is a point on jobs. The startup ecosystem accounts for a significant proportion of jobs, and increasingly the growth of lower middle class jobs, the gig economy jobs, and we've said as many as 1 million white collar jobs and as many as 4 million gig jobs are being driven by the startup ecosystem. So these are all reasons for which we say that the startup ecosystem is not a cute little kind of part of the Indian economy anymore. It's a sizable part of the economy. And in the coming years, will actually be even more sizable. So it's sort of, think of it as a new IT sector. That's the way we would like to look at it.
The new IT sector, as Sajith puts it, has had several enabling factors going for it. This includes the massive expansion in India 3 after the country managed to lift 430 million out of poverty over the last 15 years. And, of course, the formalization of the Indian economy.
Indeed. I can't agree more with you. I think predominantly for us, I think startup ecosystem, our choke point is the consumption that India 1, India 2, India 3 do. And the higher the consumption that we do, effectively, we kind of benefit from that. So it is in our interest to kind of see this growth happen. And initiatives such as the poverty reduction, the formalization that we're seeing. You mentioned about formalization. So, for example, whether it's the jump in taxpayers from 6 million to 14 million thanks to GST, etc. Whether it is the growth in income tax filers itself from about 40 million in 2015 to 63 million. So the actual number of payers are really 25% of that, and we need to improve that. But formalization, and today, for example, what it means is that historically, if you wanted Indians to pay tax, or you wanted Indians to pay by credit card or digital, they would actually worry about, But today, people are beginning to see the benefit. People want to be kind of part of the formal economy. They want to be seen. They want to be legible to the government so that they get benefits of whether it's digital benefit transfer or the GST, etc.
The obvious question then, is this India's moment?
Many such claims have been made, and one can't say good disproven, but people did say that what was expected did not happen. But I would say, Anil, that I'm an optimist. You have to be an optimist if you're operating in the Indian startup ecosystem. And I do believe that it is India's moment now. And for that, we have kind of looked at a number of factors from the geopolitical one, which is helping manufacturing, export, and Indian export growth, whether it's a muscular industrial policy that is, and in the incentives. Then, for example, the strong digital public goods ecosystem that's happening, the growth in the startup ecosystem, all of this is really making me hopeful that it is India's moment. And I do think we have the next 10 years. Increasingly, it looks from all of the factors, what we're seeing in the West, etc., that India is likely to be one of the strong consumer engines powering the global ecosystem. We have the largest growing economy, major economy in the world last year. I don't see any reason why that can't continue. So I am very hopeful indeed.
In the final analysis, it is clear that the startup economy has turned a corner. Like I said at the beginning, in sync with the real economy. A happy convergence of circumstances suggests that this time it won't be a false positive. Clearly, India's best is yet to come. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Strat News Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas and insights with us. I'm available on Twitter @Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.